Yes, so we have Maria next up, who works at B Labs, which is the non-profit that certifies B Corp companies. You are in charge of community engagement and trying to get more companies to aspire to and abide by the B Corp principles. So thank you for joining us. Can you, as a starting point, and because I'm not sure how much people know about B Corps, can you start by explaining the principles that embody the movement?
Of course, and thanks for having me here. Maybe just before I get started, just to gauge who's in the room, how many of you have heard of a B Corp or work at a B Corp? All right, okay,
nice.
That's great.
Quite a lot.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. B Corps essentially are companies that believe in using business as a force for good. So one of the key principles behind being a B Corp is being stakeholder driven. So operating in the benefit of people, communities, and the planet, rather than the traditional shareholder primacy mentality. So one of the core principles is how do you actually embed that into how your business is run and your impact business models. But another core principle is this idea of continuous improvement. So while, of course, we're best known for our certification, we really look at B Corp certification and also our tools as a framework for continuous improvement. So the tools that we use, the B Impact Assessment, are actually a free-to-use tool. So any business, any company can go ahead and take that, gauge, how they're performing, where they're doing well, where they could improve, and then continuously improve their impact to be a better business, essentially.
Are there any companies you want to highlight from within the movement that are particularly good examples or famous examples of B Corps?
Sure. Because we're here in the Netherlands, Tony Chocolonely is one of the famous B Corps from here, and they actually have been a B Corp as long as the movement has existed here in Europe, so for 10 years.
Okay.
Patagonia is also a very well-known B Corp, Veja, but we have actually companies across, I think, 160 different industries. So there's a wild range of different companies.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes B Corp can get equated entirely with environmental principles. Could you perhaps first outline what the environmental principles are, but then do you want to discuss the other worker governance? You've already mentioned some of the shareholder stuff, but some of those principles as well.
Of course. And I think, when we talk about sustainability, it's very easy to quickly think about the environment. And also, especially with kind of the urgency that we need to take climate action, oftentimes, the idea of reducing emissions becomes kind of a central part of the narrative, as it should be. But I think we really believe that, climate justice inherently needs to go hand in hand with social justice as well. And, for business to be impactful and for us to address the wide range of social and environmental issues that we face today, it's really important for a business to look at their impact holistically. So what our framework does is there's 5 key impact areas. So the BIA looks at a company's governance, so how they run their business, how they make decisions, its impact in community, its impact towards its customers, its impact towards the environment. I'm also missing one. And its impact towards its workers, of course. And I think it's really important that, no company is perfect, so there's always kind of, perhaps an area that they might be performing better than others. But the idea is that, by looking at their impact holistically, they can really identify areas for improvement. And we're doubling down on that idea of holistic impact by evolving our standards. So currently we have a flexible scoring model where a company still has to meet pretty high standards and score a minimum of 80 points in order to certify. But actually, in order to accelerate action, one of the things that we're looking at is having non-negotiable requirements across a range of key issues, including climate action, justice, equity, and diversity, human rights, that every company has to meet across the board.
And how long does it typically take a company to achieve B Corp status? I imagine it's not kind of one exercise, it would be a kind of constant process. How long does that normally take?
It's a good question. And if anybody here has gone through the process, we get a lot of feedback that it's quite a laborious process as well, with lots of different steps. It really depends on the company's size, its complexity, if it has subsidiaries in different parts of the world, its business model and things like that. So it can take a company anywhere from 3 months up until 4 to 5 years, if they're, a big multinational.
Yeah.
So it can take a while.
And how far back? Because I guess a lot of companies, their influence is the business itself, but then they've also got this supply chain trail. How far back do you go? What's the scope of the certification?
It depends on the industry. There are questions that ask about a company's value chain as well. And I think it depends on, the industry that they're working in. I think because we're trying to create a framework that's standardized across different industries, sometimes we can't go as in depth into, the entire value chain of fashion, for example.
Yeah.
But there are a good amount of questions that look at, the impact of your suppliers, the impact of the end consumer, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And when we talked before, we talked about this narrative that it's planet and profit are two separate things, and you're going after one or you're going after the other. I think then you had some examples of how those things can actually work together. Do you want to kind of illustrate those? I think it's important. Yeah,
and I think probably a lot of the people in this room have already challenged that conception. But, I think traditionally this idea of business existing for profit is something that has competed with impact, right? And that, investing in impact initiatives feels like a trade-off, right? You have to take budget from your marketing to, potentially kind of donate into impact initiatives. And I think we're really seeing that that's not the case, especially for companies that manage to really embed that thinking into their business model and how they run business. And for us, now that the B Corp community in Europe has grown to over 1,300 companies, or 2,600 if you consider the UK as well, we now have data of how those companies are changing over time as well, because companies have to certify every 3 years. So one thing that we found looking at our data is that with that recertification cycle, so every 3 years, companies on average are growing by 22% in annual revenue, and increasing their workforce by 8% of kind of full-time and part-time workers. But at the same time, they're also increasing in impact. So we're seeing that 40% of B Corps add a new impact business model into the way that they operate. So we're not talking about like an incremental small change. Like they've made a significant improvement in how they're running their business. And we see also an average increase score of 6%. Okay. So we're seeing, that growth doesn't have to, doesn't have to be at the expense of people on the planet, and vice versa. Yeah. I guess it's also about future-proofing your business, right? If you're within planetary boundaries, it's important. Something else I wanted to talk about is there's been some comments sometimes that B Corp is now certifying big multinationals, and previously it had been kind of smaller companies. What does that tension mean for the movement? Where's that drawing you, and what does that mean? Definitely. It's a question we get a lot, and it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because I think when a movement gains credibility and gains attention and becomes a proof of concept, it also attracts the interest of more and more people and more companies. And I think we believe that we need to bring in all kinds of stakeholders in order to transform the economic system. The B Corp movement has inherently started with really small, purpose-driven organizations, and that's still a big part of the community. So 95% of B Corps around the world are small, medium enterprises. But we do see kind of a role for, if we're talking about challenging the world's most pressing issues, we don't just need to, create an exclusive club to applaud the best behavior. We also need to be able to transform people who are a part of the problem. And we really do believe that our tools and also our community can help hold businesses accountable to change. But I think for sure, no company is perfect. So we need to ensure that both our standards continue to evolve, and also that we have processes in place to hold companies accountable for their actions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess it's better to have a company engaging with dialogue than entirely outside of that.
And also, I think, when we're talking about influencing policy change, for example, or transforming an entire industry, you need to work with some of the key players that have that kind of influence to really change that narrative and show what's possible as well.
That's true. And something else you mentioned when we spoke before is a growing interest from investors and even VC firms becoming B Corps themselves. Can you explain a bit about that? And is that part of kind of an ESG boom interest, or is that a separate thing? Some comment on that would be good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think what's influencing it. I think we always talk about, is it the consumer, the increase in demand from consumers that's driving businesses to change? Is it changes in policy that are also influencing investor decisions? And I think it's all of the above. All of it is influencing each other, and investors' growing interest in investing in impact-driven companies, I think, is also an incentive for businesses to change. And, earlier we were talking about unicorns, but I think there's this growth in mindset of zebra companies that are for profit, but also for purpose. And we're seeing that interest from investors as well. As you mentioned, there's lots of different types of either VC firms or investment companies that are actually B Corps as well.
Yep.
So if anybody here is interested, you could use our B Corp directory and search for investors or investment and tap into that network. But we're also seeing B Corp start accelerator funds. For example, Danone and Social Nest have started a program called Scale the Impact in Spain. And yeah, there's some incredible companies and also some B Corps that have raised a lot of capital. Like Too Good To Go is an incredible success story.
Yep.
I think over the years they've raised 85 million or something like that. And
yeah, they're an interesting one.
Yeah.
I think we can turn to questions from you guys if anyone has any for Maria. We've got this mic we can throw to you. Oh, this is quite far for me to throw. I'm worried I'll kill someone.
Do I need the mic or...
There we go.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks. Really inspiring to hear from you. B Corp, of course, is a label made for big corporations or smaller corporations. I'm a freelance creative. But I also believe that it would be really good to have some kind of a label, some kind of a certification for freelancers. Since more and more people are working freelance and they can have really big impact because they work at all these different companies. Are you guys thinking about that, working on that at B Lab, something for freelancers, a guideline to help them make sustainable, social, responsible choices?
I love that. That's a really good idea. It's not something that we're per se working on yet, but I think what we've seen also from accelerator programs or also B Corps who are looking to influence their suppliers or their partners, they take some of the principles from the B impact assessment and use that to kind of make decisions. So kind of like a moral compass as well. So I think some of the kind of principles and questions within the BIA could definitely be used to help, you pick who you want to work with, and also to perhaps demonstrate your own impact of what are some of the actions that you take within your work or principles within your creative practice. So I think that would be interesting to explore. Perhaps we could get a group together to kind of look at, what are some of the questions within the BIA that would be relevant for that.
Thanks for
That's a
that.
good question.
I'm working on that actually. So.
Do we have any other questions? Down the front here.
Can you catch it?
Hi. What's the reason why there are just as many B Corp companies in the UK as there are in all of Europe?
That is
That's
a
a good
very good
question.
question.
Yeah, I think, a lot of factors contribute to that. I think also how the local teams have evolved. The language differences, I think now we're getting better at translating a lot of the B Impact questionnaire, but I think for a while it was based in English. I think there's other factors within different markets that have slowed down the growth of different kinds of business. Another thing that we're looking at is we beyond the certification, we also advocate for policy change. So also, what are the political circumstances in different countries? And for example, in Spain, our teams just passed a law called Empresas con Propósito for companies to legally be able to kind of incorporate as a benefit corporation. But that's something that in some countries that ecosystem isn't as friendly for that. And I think also the concentration of businesses being all I mean, now the B Corp community in the UK is a lot more spread out across the country and across the region. But I think it originated with a lot of companies based in London as well. So I think once you have that community, it does have that ripple effect. And we're starting to see that take action. The growth has kind of grown exponentially in countries in the last 2 to 3 years, but just wasn't there initially. But we hope to surpass them.
There was a question just behind you. Is that the case? And then we'll go here, and then we probably have to finish up.
Thank you. Do B Corps outperform non-B Corps, and if so, why?
Well, I think in some of those numbers that I shared, so like the 22% annual growth, I think compared to the average, they definitely do outperform. And I think we also see some other indicators of kind of employee retention or brand loyalty and things like that. It, of course, varies per company and by industry. I think part of it is the demand of, people want to buy from, work for, partner with companies that are aligned with their values, and being able to actually demonstrate that. It's not just an advertising campaign that these companies are putting out, but it's actually something that they've been able to measure and that they also continuously improve. So I think there's different appeals to that or around that for different audiences. So I think maybe that's why.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Last question here, and then we'll have to wrap up, sadly.
Thank you. I work in the agri sector, where a lot of small farmers, we call them smallholders, contribute between 40 to 80% of the supply chain, but are not visible. We're working on some initiatives. I was wondering if B Corp companies, is there a mechanism whereby large corporations that source agri products would be able to facilitate or enhance the livelihood of these smallholders? If there was a mechanism, as we are trying through tokens on a blockchain platform, would B Corp be able to facilitate such an initiative? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It is, it's part of, sorry, I can't see you. It is part of the assessment that's asked, especially for companies that operate in the agricultural sector. I think, the relationship to the suppliers and ensuring fair wages, livelihood, and kind of economic growth, I think, is really important and key. There's some B Corps specifically working in this space in different industries. So Moi Coffee, for example, have the fair chain principle within the coffee industry. But I think it's also something that could apply to other agricultural sectors. So happy to share kind of some of those case studies as well. And yeah, I think there's a lot of case studies within the B Corp community as well. And we're starting to see larger companies, like, for example, Bonduelle has some subsidiaries that are certified, and I think they're implementing a lot of really interesting practices within their farms and with the farmers that they work with. So yeah, would love to connect more on that and also share how our assessment looks into that too.
Thank you.
Cool, great. Are you sticking around for a bit today? Will people be able to catch you for
the next 15, 20 minutes? And
okay,
then
cool.
I need to go to change now if anybody's in Paris.
Oh, nice. Okay, well, grab Maria quickly then for more questions. But great, thank you. That was really interesting.
Thanks so much, Freya. Thanks, everyone.